Welcome to Mission Oriented, a veteran crowd podcast that showcases veteran talent from both the private and public sectors. Their impact is everywhere. We are here to uncover it. Here's your host, Bob Louthen.
Welcome to the Mission Oriented podcast on the Veteran Crowd Network. I'm your man, Bob Louthen. It's good to be back. I've got a great story to tell today. My guest is Doug Moran. He is the author of If You Will Lead. He's a Richmonder with a lot of history here in the Old Dominion. But Doug, welcome to the program. Thanks for being on the Mission Oriented podcast today.
Bob, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's I've just finished reading Doug's book, If You Will Lead, and it's a fascinating story. We're going to jump into that in just a minute. Doug, but before we do that, tell everybody a little bit about your background. You've been in business, you've been at Capital One and some other plages, but years ago started your own company. Tell everybody, kind of give the quick history.
Yeah, so I love your mission as an organization, and so as just to be in the spirit of pure transparency, I'm not a veteran, but I am a Navy brat. I always aspired to go into the military. So when I graduated from college, I actually thought I was going to go in the Navy, follow my dad's footsteps. Found out I was colorblind, and they offered me supply corps. And at 22, I didn't want that. I wanted something a little more, a little sexier. And so it's one of those regrets in my life. I look back and regret.
You went to Top Gun like the rest of us.
I did. That's exactly what I was thinking. So I went to work for it was Bell Atlantic at the time, now Verizon. Spent 8 years and fell into into IT, which was most of my career was in the IT world. And I fell into it because I started working in a technology oriented firm and spent 8 years there and I've always loved politics. And while I was in DC working for Bell Atlantic, I started working on then Congressman George Allen's campaign for governor. He decided he wanted to be governor, and I really liked him, so I got on his campaign as a volunteer. And when he became governor, he offered me a role. I came down to Virginia, where I served as telecommunications director for the state. And I did a really weird move and went over and ran the Department of Social Services. And then for the last 4 months of the administration, I served as the deputy secretary of Health and Human Resources. So I had a great time, did some really exciting things, one of which was welfare reform. And a lot of the things I learned in that experience working for the governor really made their way into my leadership philosophy and to the work I do now, and manifested themselves in the book. While I was working for the governor, I learned about this company, Capital One, and I said, that's where I want to be. And literally, that was the place I picked 2 years into being here. And as soon as I was gone, as soon as I left the administration, I joined Capital One, spent 10 years there in a variety of roles. Last of which was I was a divisional CIO, divisional chief information officer for one of the 3 main business units. And so that was my time at Capital One. And during that time at Capital One, I fell in love with the coaching process. I had a coach almost the entire time I was there. One of my very favorite poetic justice stories is the cover of my book is a quote, and the books get, you get blurbs from people, and the publisher gets to choose where they go. And my publisher chose Wendy Swire as her quote as the cover quote, which is the place of honor in a book. And she was my first coach and my last coach at Capital One, and she really helped me become the leader I was at Capital One, and helped me figure out what I needed to do was leave there and start this. And so that was 2008. I've been doing this since then. I went to Georgetown and couldn't have timed my decision to become a coach more wrong, I should say.
Oh gosh.
And that I was starting out in a very entrepreneurial setting, and in a situation where everything I got was based on what I went out and found. and nobody was hiring coaches in 2008. And
Right.
so, but things turned out. I stuck with it, went through Georgetown, finished the book, uh, through a lot of hard work, and I think some divine intervention. I managed to make a go of it, and have been very successful, very happy as a coach since.
I guess did you just before we kind of get into the book, did you just discover some things about yourself that I don't know, in hindsight now make a lot of sense to you, but that maybe you've always been being groomed to be a coach? Are those,
Yeah, well, I was never good at anything. You know, I mean, I really wasn't. I was never an expert. I'm being a little bit facetious, but uh, and I am not being immodest when I say it. I've never been great at any one thing except for getting other people to do great things. And I think I know that being a leader is hard and it takes a lot of work. And I've always spent a lot of time studying leaderships. And so I think what I found was that this was my gift. This was the thing that made me special, is that I do have the ability to help others be really great. And and so and again, as I said, it isn't something I take for granted, because I think I've worked hard at it, and I have studied it. I read all the time, either histories or biographies, or or leadership um, books and the like. But I get more joy, more learning from histories and biographies than I do from the academic or the trade writing on the topic of leadership. So
I
that's
wish I could
my book.
remember. I wish I could remember where I got this, but it was a book I read recently, and the teacher learns the most. I think is actually one of the things.
Oh
It's
yeah,
you tell an interesting story as a young man about the poem "If"
yeah.
by Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling, most well known probably for writing the Jungle Book, but an interesting fellow. Share that story of the early influence, and then because I think that sets the table for us to discuss the book pretty well.
Yeah, it is one of those, a little bit embarrassing, but good stories, in the sense that my mom gave me a copy of If when I was about 13 or 14 years old, and it was her father's favorite poem. It was something he believed was really important for all young men to read and to learn and to know. And so and I think he felt it was important for her too. I think it was for all, not just young men, but Kipling wrote it for men. But I think my grandfather gave it to my mom and to my as kids, to help them inform who they were. And I wish I could say it really resonated with me. It didn't. It went in one ear and out the other. And then about it was in my mid to late 20s. I was dating my wife, and she gave me the "Hey, let's just be friends" conversation. She broke that to me, and it really rocked me. And I did a lot of soul searching, and I heard a story on the radio about that poem, and on my way home from work. And this was shortly after getting dumped by the woman who I thought was in love with. And I pulled off the side of the road, went to a bookstore, bought a collection of poems with that book in it, or with that poem in it. And I read it regularly, and I started thinking about, what does it mean for me? And why was it so important to my grandfather? And it started to crystallize. Things started crystallizing for me, that I needed to be more true to myself and more true to who I was meant to be. And so it was I wish I had learned it sooner, but I'm not sure I was ready for that lesson. And
You must have learned it in time to,
yeah,
turn the franchise around from your wife's perspective.
yeah, I did. We ended up becoming great friends, and it's one of those things I tell all young couples: if you're not really good friends, you better be, because it's not easy. And so we got to be great friends, and a few years later we were married. So it's a great story.
Okay, well, you're living it. You're living
Yep.
it. So, so I'm not going to read the entire poem. Google it, guys. You can find it. If if Rudyard Kipling.
Yeah, you can download a
But
copy from my website too if you want. Yeah,
but if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. 16
16 couplets.
stanzas, 16 couplets, and each one of them, a lesson to young men and women about, what it means to be, uh, 16
Being
different
a,
things,
yeah,
right?
being an
So,
adult in our society, really.
so what was the spark? Did you have sort of a revelation when you said, I can write a book about this and apply it to leadership?
Well,
How
so
did that happen?
as I said, I started reading it regularly. I would read it, not every night, but I'd lay in bed, after I'd do my evening reading or whatever I was doing, or I'd just scan it and think about it. And I realized it started crystallizing into a series of uh, key attributes, things that you need to have to be successful, to be yourself, to be genuinely, yourself in this world. And that first line, that if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, it really, from the moment I've read it, it's like, yeah, you got to keep your act together. If you don't, if you lose your composure, that's deadly. And how important it is to let to be an emotional person is good. To embrace all the emotions we possess is a good thing, but to allow your emotions to control you is where they become dangerous. And that line really resonated with me because I have a temper, and no, I wish I could say it was gone, but I know that if I wasn't constantly aware of the importance of composure and who I am, that temper probably would show up more. And so it is something that I believe in. And the next line is about um, character. If you can trust yourself, trusting yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for the doubting too. That is all about, if you know really deep down who you are, and you're willing to say, okay, why is this other person saying this other thing about me, or believes this other thing to be true about me? Take allowance or make allowance for those doubts that others have in us. Then we can really make well-grounded, well-informed, integrated decisions about how we lead our businesses, how we lead our lives, how we act in this world. And I think, quite frankly, I think it's what's wrong with our society, is that a combination of a lack of character, that second couplet, and then later in the poem it talks about
Well,
integrity.
you've opened up a can of worms with that one, but I'm going to jump right in on that because I was coming into this conversation thinking, we're at a point in time where our society needs more of this.
Mhm.
There have been so many lessons that are taught in social media and on television and everywhere where the wrong values um, are raised up. I mean, I watched it this weekend. At the end of some major college football
Oh
games,
yeah.
as an example. I mean, look at how poor the judgment was, and but there were examples of coaches that were leading in the right way, and examples of other coaches that I'm not sure I want my son playing for them, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Can you
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel the same way about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it was the Florida State coach who said his players there will be consequences, and they're going to make it to a bowl, and they'll probably sit them. And I think that's great. I think that it is more important to do the right thing than to win. And as in our society right now, it feels like everything is about winning as opposed to doing the right thing and winning in the long run. Because I do believe you can win in the long run if you do the right thing. And my father used to say something to me that really resonated. My dad had lots of great, we called them Moisms, and
Uh-huh.
Mo, and he was a wise man, and he used to say, for every complex problem, there's a simple answer, and it's wrong. And
Uh-huh.
our society is full of complex problems. And I won't get into we won't get into politics because that's a dangerous place. But I think what's wrong with our current political environment is that we are taking very complex issues and trying to boil them down to simple sound bites and allowing ourselves to get distracted by the simple answers as opposed to really believing deeply in our core values and accepting the fact that if I do this thing, it is going to uphold these values while at the same time violate these values. That's real integrity. What is the old expression? True test of integrity isn't the difference between right and wrong or good and bad. It's the distinguishing between right and wrong. And, the two things, both are right, and figuring out which one's more right, or two things are both bad options, but figuring out the least bad option. Sometimes we have to do that. And our current, in our current society, I don't think people are willing to have those hard conversations about this is, this is the truth. It isn't as easy as we can do everything that we say we can. So
I gotta take you down the path of emoism and ask you, what your father might have said if I sort of turned one of the things you just said, we have simple solutions to complex problems and they're the wrong solution. But I would ask your father if sometimes the most simple root cause is isn't the isn't the right root cause, if you
oh
understand
yeah,
what I'm going to, the
absolutely.
most logical reason for something happening. But we can dig into that later. You break the book into 4 sections, and then you chose 16 different historical figures that you felt exhibited the particular character trait. I'm going to let you pick one that you'd like to talk about. You've got 16 people. Everybody, we're talking about Martin Luther King, Thomas Jefferson, Winston Churchill. I didn't know who Michael Collins was, candidly, before I read the book. Ronald Reagan, Teddy Roosevelt. Is there one that stands out that we ought to drill
Yeah.
down on right now?
Well, there are a couple that stand out that the ones that I've had the most fun writing about were the ones I didn't know a lot about. And so like Nelson Mandela was really fun to write about because I didn't know anything other than what I'd read about in the newspapers and reading that, I'd read a lot of books about everybody I wrote about. And so, but the one I want to highlight really is Harriet Tubman. And that's because it is near and dear to somebody in your organization's heart, one of your board members, Jen Finn and I were talking at my going away party at Capital One. And I had created my outline and was getting ready to show it to my wife. And I got to the bottom of the stairs and I was really excited because I identified 16 leaders I really wanted to write about. And they were well matched with the attribute that they were going to be associated with. And I got to the bottom of the stairs and, shouted some, or mumbled some expletive and marched back upstairs. And my wife comes up a few minutes later and said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Well, I just realized I picked 15 white guys and Martin Luther King." And it just reveals my biases and my natural, the education I had. It was, the historical heroes that we had were mostly men.
Do you remember? Do you remember one of them that got cut? Who was on the cutting room floor? Maybe.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think who was. So
It'll come back to you.
it'll come to me. Yeah, yeah. But there were some good ones, and it was.
Yeah.
But I went to the day I had this realization, I was going to my going away party at Capital One, and Jen was there, and I told her about what I had discovered. She said, "Harriet Tubman," right then. It was like instantly. And I went, I said, "Okay, let me think about that." And I went and just did a little bit of reading, and instantly, um, I felt like she was a perfect fit, and it was, um, so that was one that was a lot of fun to write about because I felt like it was a friend helping me open my eyes. And then she and I had a few other conversations about who other people I could talk to. I started just asking around, and I really wish I had done what was going to be a follow-up book, which would have been uh, one more oriented towards young women, and it was going to be with my daughter, I was going to write it, and it was going to be a book where we focused on the horse and rider relationship, but
Hmm.
that never came about. And that would have had a lot more strong women in it. And I also wish I had had more women in this book. So, uh, but that resilience that Harriet Tubman showed in her life, her whole life was a story of resilience, and that was the attribute I associated with her. And I'm trying to remember who I replaced with, who she replaced on my original list. But yeah, she was just perfect. And I was sad about that the movie wasn't better about her. It was
Hmm.
okay, but yeah. So, and you asked about
Uh,
Michael Collins. Michael Collins was one of my heroes. He's an Irish revolutionary who I named my son after him. And I
yeah.
wanted to name my son Mick, call him Michael, or name him Michael, call him Mick. And my wife told me that we had a son named Mick Moran. He'd sound like he's a street fighter or something. So that never happened.
You gotta be careful, what
Yeah.
you do with that. So, let's talk a little bit about the position of being a professional coach. I did not have a professional coach until in the last several years. I actually regret it. I wonder what differences. I mean, what does a person need to consider when they're thinking about having an executive coach?
I think, it starts with an openness to grow and learn. If you have a growth mindset, coaching's great. It is not it is not something to go into if you want to be told here's the path forward. And and I've worked with people in the past who really did think there was a cookie cutter approach, or I would show up with answers. And I'm willing to give answers all the time. I probably am I am not a perfect coach. I will give answers to my clients. But I'm more willing to step back and let them ask them hard questions, push them to solve the problems themselves. But and to be successful in an environment like that, you have to have that growth mindset of wanting to solve problems, figure out what's going on, figure out what's working, and build on that, as well as figuring out what's not working and finding paths forward. I'm a big believer in strength-based coaching, where if you over focus on the weaknesses and try and eliminate your weaknesses and make them, ultimately turn your weaknesses into strength, it's going to be frustrating and disappointing. So I often tell people, if a good answer sometimes is to take a weakness and find somebody who you work with who's great at that and lean
You
on them.
remind me of Russell Wilson, the quarterback now for the
Yeah,
Pittsburgh Steelers. He
yeah,
talked about his grandmother saying, "Make sure one of your strengths is that you know what your weaknesses are." I've
yeah.
quoted many, many, many times.
It's critical, and so many people, when we do assessments, or when I provide feedback to folks, my coaching process always involves some level of feedback gathering. And I always tell people, if you try and fix all of these weaknesses, you're just going to make yourself miserable. Take your strengths and make them really towering. Build on your strengths, and then build relationships and build processes that compensate for your weaknesses, more so than trying to eliminate them. I mean, obviously, if there's something that's really getting in your way, you gotta deal with that. But it's not about trying to become great at that. It's something that's been a weakness. So
One man, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another, right?
yeah,
I think having mentors and so on. Do you encourage leaders to have other advisors, to have mentors, to have accountability groups? I mean, are there some things that I've just touched on that you think are really particularly important?
I think mentorship is critical, and there's a big difference. I thought I was going to just skate into coaching because I was a good mentor. I did a lot of mentoring. I was at Capital One. I don't know if I was a good mentor. I had a lot of mentees, and so I would guess I was pretty good because I got asked a lot. But it is different. It is, mentorship is about, hey, let's work this system together and help you get ahead and figure out what do you need to work on. And again, it's knowing an organization, knowing a profession. It's a lot of advice giving in the sense. And so, uh, yeah, I think mentorship and coaching are really nice complementary uh, or approaches. And so I often encourage my coaching clients to get a mentor. And if they don't have one, find one, and find a mentor that really will help them build what they're looking for. And there's a guy named Doug Pick who is he runs Feedmore here in Virginia. And when we worked together at Capital One, he was a little ahead of me in the organization. I asked him to mentor me, and he said, "No, we're too much alike." And he was right on. He wasn't the right person to mentor me. I needed somebody who was different, who had a different approach. Not that I was going to emulate that other person. I would have been false and inauthentic if I had tried to follow another person's approach. But they helped me build things that were different skills that I had that I need to be successful.
How do you does like what's step one when you bring in a new client from a coaching standpoint? I guess the theme is getting to know yourself, right? Well, what's sort of step one in the process?
It's getting so them getting to know themselves, but one of the best ways is to teach me about them. And so I will interview them. I will then interview a bunch of people they work with, and I'll have them take an assessment, and I'll look at any other assessment materials they have, anything that they give me. I just kind of soak it up.
How often are we wrong about our self-image? Let me ask that question. I mean, I imagine that other people see you from a different perspective. Are we just totally off base about what we think we're like?
I think the older I get, I think the more I know myself, and so I think it's we do get to know ourselves better and better. Most people aren't dead wrong; they're just a little wrong, and that can be dangerous. I think if you think you're really good at something, and you're just okay. That's the problem, because you really lean on it heavily, and so I think most people are pretty aligned. There are times when
Do you see a difference between somebody that you're coaching that's 30 and somebody you're coaching that's 50?
I think people who have been through a lot of adversity in their life and have been tested, I think they get to know themselves better. I think there's one of my favorite books is called Falling Upward. It's about the second half of life, and the author Richard Rohr talks about great love and great adversity are the things that will drive us into that second half of life. And my daughter, I think, she's 28, turned 28 later this month. She's already in the second half of life because she's been through some great adversity. She's had some health issues that have driven her to see things in a way and be more aware of the world around her, and therefore more circumspect and self-reflective than most people at that age. I know I wasn't anywhere near as self-aware as she is when I was that age. But I do think those, kind of shocks to our system are good for us. And, that event that, we started with where my wife, dumped me, that was everything to talk about. But it's a beautiful story because she changed my life. And, and those things, those kicks we get, I often say that when we fail, when we come back, we come back better than we were before. Maybe not in all ways, but fundamentally, kind of at our core, we come back stronger.
I think somebody's got to be coachable. They've got to realize
they do.
There were things that I used to look for in a client, and one of them was, are they coachable? Because if they already know everything, they're not going to get anything out of being associated with me, and I'm not going to be happy either, because it can be kind of frustrating being a coach when the person's not a coachable individual. Let me shift gears on you just a second. I've studied some other things about leadership. I've got a good friend down in Virginia Beach, Bob Pizzini, who's written a book called Elevate Your Leadership. And he talked a little bit about the science of leadership, your mindset. You've got to have a positive attitude, but you got to have your health and your soul and your relationships and so forth in balance also. He also talks about good nutrition and sleep and some of the scientific elements of being most effective. Do you delve into topics like that when you're coaching people about, you're not getting enough sleep. You can't run on 4 hours a night and be an effective leader, as an example. Do you touch on some of those things?
Oh yeah. Yeah. When I went to Georgetown, they talked about coaching the whole person, body, mind, spirit, soul, and some people don't want to hear it. That's okay. But I will challenge them. I'll ask, a lot of times we get to challenges they're facing that are intellectual on their surface, but deep down inside they're physical, because like you said, that people aren't getting enough sleep. They're not getting the right nutrients to feed their mind so that they can make good decisions. So I do believe in the interconnectedness of all of this. And the one of the other chapters that I really like in the book was the chapter on stamina. Uh, and I liked it so much because I knew the two people I wrote about. There was the only chapter it was about somebody who I really knew intimately and personally, and it was the only chapter that had two leaders, and it was husband and wife, Jim and Louise Mulligan. Jim was a POW in Vietnam, one of the longest serving POWs, and one of the Alcatraz 11. And he talks about that, or he talked about it. He passed away a few years ago, and one of the things he would often talk about to students, and I remember when he talked about my high school class and my daughter's high school class, which was really fun to do. He said the same thing: is that when our minds, when our bodies are breaking down, our minds are can't function well, and sometimes the physical. Just the exhaustion, or the physical exhaustion we put our bodies through can manifest itself in so many bad ways. And poor decisions, poor emotional responses, all that.
That is, you could do an entire study on that group of POWs, the impact that they had when they returned. I mean, you've got Jeremiah Denton, and here in Richmond, a colleague and great friend, Paul Galante, and what a inspiring group of individuals, with the things that they did when they came back, to make a positive impact. And Admiral Stockwell.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You talk about these people, Stockdale. I got to get the name
Yeah.
right.
But you just hit on what is it? We talked about 5 of the Alcatraz 11 just then, and those guys in particular were just amazing. Yeah.
It's an incredible story in leadership. So if you will lead, great book. I'd like to get a couple extra copies. I want to give one away to to folks that comment and give us a good comment on the podcast on this. But the book is available on Amazon and other sources. You've got. How do people get in touch with you, Doug?
You can reach me on my website or by email. It's doug.moran@ifyouwilllead.com is my email, and the website is ifyouwilllead.com, obviously. And I look forward to anybody who wants to ask me any questions on leadership. I love just geeking out on this stuff. It's fun.
I like your comment, geeking out on this stuff. I mean, I love reading this kind of stuff. And you are thinking about writing a sequel? Is that
No, my wife?
no?
No, my wife was my editor, and she, my first editor. My publisher hired a professional editor, obviously, but she was so good. I always joke that if left to my own devices, my book would have been about 4 times as thick, unfinished, and I'd be, working somewhere at a corporation. I wouldn't be a coach right now if it weren't for her ability to winnow it down to something useful. So it is. This is my one and only book. I loved the process. I like writing. I love it. It is real work, and I'm an extrovert, so writing requires a lot of just heads down.
And I have to admit, I am using AI to write a lot of drafts of things now that in the past I've ground through. So writing is definitely definitely a challenge, but I want you to know you rose to the occasion. I really enjoyed the book. I strongly recommend all my listeners out there, if you get a copy of If You Will Lead, Enduring Wisdom for the 21st Century Leaders by Doug Moran. Doug, thank you for being a guest on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure, Bob. It was lots of fun.
Good, good.
Take care.
But you've been listening to the Mission Oriented podcast on the Veteran Crowd Network. Again, my guest has been Doug Moran. You'll find links to get in touch with Doug and find his webpage and his book on the show notes. And Doug, I'll just give you one more quick shout out. I know you're a Navy brat, but I'm going to give you an Army Bravo Zulu for your performance today. And that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Mission Oriented. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and you won't miss an episode. To learn more about Mission Oriented and the Veteran Crowd Network, visit us at www.veterancrowdnetwork.com.